Hi, welcome to Governance Bites. I'm Mark Banicevich, and today I get to spend time with the amazing Kendall Flutey. Hello, Kendall.
Hey Mark, thanks so much for having me here.
Oh, it's great to see you. Always great to catch up with you. Kendall is founder and co-CEO of Banqer, which is a really impressive social purpose business around financial literacy, initially in schools and expanding beyond that now. So primary schools, secondary schools in New Zealand and Australia. And what it does is it runs a classroom as a virtual economy, which is such an exciting way to learn about money. Now, Kendall was also Young New Zealander of the Year in 2019 and is now on a number of boards, including the board of the Financial Markets Authority and a commissioner, I think, on one of the Ombudsman schemes, if so. So a very impressive lady and such an amazing person to spend time with. So thank you very much for your time, Kendall.
No, it's a pleasure to be here.
I'm going to start with a question, actually, because you're relatively new to governance. So you'll probably remember some of your experiences about how you were brought onto board. So can you tell me a little bit about the onboarding processes that you've experienced and how you got introduced to the role in each entity?
You're right, I am relatively new to governance. My journey sort of started off with supporting community trusts, and now we've gone all the way through to, supporting public sector, multi-$100 million budget line entities. And each onboarding has been slightly different. I would say they've been fit for purpose. So with the likes of my very first governance roles and another education co-op actually. So a community focused educational offering, and I was a trustee. Really onboarding looked like having a coffee with the chair, talking through some of the challenges, catching up with the NCE and talking about their ambitions, reading a little bit through the past minutes. But that was really it. I could get into the meat of the meetings very quickly without too much of a run up. And it was a bit of a learn as you go, ask probing questions experience. And then at the other end of the spectrum, you've got quite a robust formal onboarding process, which again, of course, involves the chair. I think getting that face time early on to understand less about the structure or current work plan, but more about the culture of the board and what you're coming into is really important. And then just a bunch more readings. So understanding what's come before you, what the current open work activities are, and really to allow me to try and figure out where I can land and add value immediately, potentially. It's an ideal situation, or what questions I need to ask and how I need to upskill myself to hit the ground running. So onboarding has never looked the same. And I think that's kind of the right approach. Every governance role deserves a slightly different onboarding.
Right, cool, thank you. Since you began your governance roles, what are some of the standout things you've learned?
Oh, I think something that comes to mind really quickly is the importance of asking the obvious questions and not necessarily sitting back and thinking it's your incapability or a lack of comprehension that's leading to that question. I found when I've asked the obvious questions, usually when I get the most nods around the table, and there's this period of time where you are the newbie and you can be forgiven for basically asking everything. So I've learned to really exploit that time period and use that to ensure that I'm asking everything I need to add value, but I'm also sometimes asking questions that others are too afraid to ask because they seem too obvious. And I'm, being relatively new in my governance career, I feel like that's a luxury I have that perhaps some more seasoned governance operators don't necessarily feel like they can lean into.
Right, I can imagine, for example, that people around the table and the CEO and the people in the business would tend to use a lot of industry jargon that you may not be familiar with. And it would be quite a sensible thing to step out and say, actually, can you explain what that is to me? Um,
Exactly, jargon for sure, but also just questioning some deeply ingrained or accepted processes that no one actually has a stack trace for. Maybe they've been in place for 15 years and no one around the table actually knows why. So obviously doing it in a way that's productive and not disruptive to the meetings, but being able to ask why we do things this particular way is a really useful reflection point. And sometimes it's a short, sharp answer because XYZ, move on. That's fine.
Mhm.
But other times I've found it's actually opened up a really genuinely valuable conversation around the board table and then later on with management.
Fantastic. What's some of the best advice you've received from other directors?
To understand your value and what role you play. When I think about some of my more later appointments, which are more significant, I take every governance role really seriously, regardless of how large the entity is. But some come with more weight, I think, inherently, be it the size of the organization in terms of people, profile, revenue. And each time I think you're going to have a little bit of imposter syndrome. But if you can understand why you're around that table objectively and try and shed that cloak of imposter syndrome, I think pretty clearly you can understand your value proposition and the unique perspectives that you bring. For example, with me, I'm typically, as it stands, a little bit younger than some of the other board members. And I also bring my startup, whānau, consumer technology hats. I would have been really shy in articulating those strengths even 18 months ago. And I've had some great mentorship to support me in understanding that I need to be strong in understanding my value so that I can actually apply that value in the right way at the right times around the table and outside of board meetings.
Great. Well, moving on from that then, is there anything that you would tell yourself 18 months ago or 2 years ago that would, change the way that you approached governance in the early days?
Yeah, definitely. It would be aligned to that values piece, which I guess flowing on from that would be confidence. I think it's very easy to sit back for a period of time and observe and learn, but I've been most effective when I've challenged myself to contribute from the start, even if it's just a few comments here and there. And I think one way to build confidence is through preparation. I know in the earlier days when I was supporting what was smaller entities, I'd try and right size my preparation and, read over the minutes, read over the board notes, whatever that pack may be. But I feel the more time I spend on a board pack, the more confident I am in my contributions, the more I connect with my fellow directors outside of meetings and we share perspectives, the more my confidence grows as well. So creating my own formal structure around preparation and preempting contributions has really helped me. And it's something I wish I'd done sooner.
Right. And you mentioned there around catching up with other directors outside of board meetings. Is that just around a coffee, and what sort of discussions are you having with other directors?
Yeah, it's informal, largely. So we're not running to an agenda as such. Typically, I find it really useful once a board pack's come out to catch up with one or two board members to talk through any standouts for me. I, as a younger board member and someone who's new to a lot of the governance roles I hold, I use that as a time to bridge my capability comprehension gap. So if there's some institutional knowledge I'm lacking, I try and get that ahead of the meeting so the meeting can be as productive for everyone as possible. So my typical flow would be to read the board pack in full, to then reach out to a couple of my colleagues around the board, be it the chair, be it another external director, to run through some of my key talking points, fill in any gaps, and then actually to read over any specific papers where I had some question marks again, and see if I can dig out any new perspectives with the new information I've gained.
That's a really good preparation approach. You've now been, CEO or co-CEO of Banqer since its inception, and you've sat on the governance side. What have those two experiences given you to benefit each other?
In one word, empathy. There's nothing like being on the other side of the table to really understand the mindset of another contributor. So I think about Banqer's governance structure. We've got a formal board. We have for many years. It's small. There's 4 of us, 2 internal, 2 external. The external is always a chair. So I can have a really deep appreciation for the value that our external board members and the role of facilitation of our chair, having been a chair on a student-led investment committee myself before, it's a really challenging role to facilitate and contribute. And then again, when I get to sit in the seat of governance, I'm also able to observe the CEO across the table as well. And that's a real privilege because I'm actually learning from the CEO. In a sense, when I take that bank to Banqer to be a CEO, I'm learning from things that they navigate really successfully, opportunities for growth, challenges, conversations I might replicate, things I might want to navigate slightly differently if I were ever in that position. So I feel really fortunate to have been exposed to both sides of the table, to wear both hats, and also to be able to strengthen and cross-pollinate the organisations that I'm involved with.
Right. So you're finding the two roles are very mutually beneficial in your case and help you be better
It,
at both roles.
yeah, absolutely, or at least help me challenge my own thinking, because I guess there's context in every place you navigate. So a decision here isn't necessarily going to be right for me, but it really makes me question and challenge myself in a way I don't think I was historically as purely a CEO.
Right. That's fantastic. Well, let's broaden the conversation a little bit now. As somebody who works as a CEO and also works in governance roles as directors, what's the role of the board of directors and what's the role of the CEO? How do the two differ?
Yep. Again, it really depends on the entity, but largely the role of the board of directors is one of governance. It's risk management. They're not necessarily sailing the ship every day, but they're making sure that the course that's charted is appropriate for the organisations, largely, again, organisation dependent, based on the aspirations of shareholders. The board's really there to serve the aspirations and goals of the shareholders, be that maximizing company value, be that maximizing company impact potentially, be that something in between, be it a legislative requirement as well, that sometimes is the foundations of a board and governance. The role of the CE is really to demonstrate operational and strategic leadership day to day. So it's executing against the agreed strategy, which the board has a key role in. Getting that delineation right is really important. I've seen it go horribly wrong in organizations I've been involved with, and I've seen it executed against really, really well. And I think the key theme in success there is clear role definition and communication when you get into the grey. For example, take risk management. You can have a risk register. It can just be a tick box exercise that the board do just because they feel like they have to, or it can be passed from the board down through operational layers so that everyone in an entity is responsible for risk management in their functions. That's a really black and white example of ensuring that roles are really clear and that organisationally and operationally something's executed against. But it gets a lot harder across different functions. So I think that role distinction is an important point that all boards should have top of mind.
Right. So having a very clear distinction between or definition really of what the CEO is there to do and what the board is there to do. And it may not be the same definition across different entities. There may be some differences, but having that clear definition so everyone understands what their role is very important.
That's it. I think about some of the earlier governance contributions I've made. I really rolled my sleeves up and was behaving quite operationally because it's a 1-2 person band. And that's what they needed from the board, as well as some of those real governance aspects as well, in terms of risk management, especially around ensuring the lights get kept on. And then there's obviously clear distinction, flying at the right altitude in some of these larger roles that I've had as well. And actually, for me to get operationally involved would be really inappropriate. So yeah, clarity is key.
Yeah, and that I'm sure can be related to, as you've intimated, the maturity of the organization or the nature of the organization as well, which kind of brings me to my next question around the difference between governance and for-profit and not-for-profit entities. And in many ways, Banqer kind of sits in the middle. It's a for-profit entity with a social purpose as its backbone. So whereas a not-for-profit entity usually has a social purpose without a profit motive, and a pure corporate traditionally would be seen as a profit motive. I think social purpose is becoming more normal, and whether it's as explicit as it is in Banqer, whether it's the driving force or whether it is as part of the DNA of the entity. But what's the difference in governance between not-for-profits and for-profits? Or does it differ?
I think it does. but maybe not in a standardized way between those two structures. I think largely it's really what is your definition of success as a board, and therefore what are the KPIs that are coming through strongly in the board pack? What are the indicators of success? I look at some of my public-facing governance roles, and we're not only looking at fiscal financial results or looking at outcomes in terms of workflow. We're actually looking at customer-centric outcomes and that have a really clear social lens. And at Banqer, it's similar. We're looking at impact KPIs and statistics. So the markers of success for our organization are different to some of the other markers which I've sat on the boards of, it's really about financial performance and then risk management around that. But I think it's a continuum, and I think it's not really coupled purely to the business type, whether it's not for profit or profit, because like you've identified, I think there's a bit of fluidity in how businesses present these days, because technically speaking, Banqer is a for-profit, but we're a social enterprise first and foremost, and we care about more than just our financial returns. So therefore, our board needs to act in a way that holds us accountable for that.
So it feels like the process of governance itself is fundamentally the same. It's what the entity is trying to achieve, what it's trying to measure in things that will actually differ. And the differences will be more along the lines of what we were saying before about whether the board needs to roll their sleeves up and get involved in the business because of the nature of the resource, whether it's a new startup business or a not-for-profit heavily reliant on volunteers compared to an established business that has a much greater separation between governance and management, where that wouldn't be appropriate. So the difference is kind of more along those lines rather than purely whether it's a for-profit or not for profit.
I think you've nailed that.
Cool, thank you. Well, one final question for you then. You've got some experience overseas now as well, having expanded into Australia for a start. Is governance the same overseas, or are there some significant differences that you've experienced in different countries?
I certainly don't feel like the authority on this question, but from what I've seen in terms of the markets I've engaged with, it's largely the same. My biggest insight actually comes from one of our more recent appointments to Banqer's board, Lisa Nelson. She's an incredible international director based in Seattle, formerly really senior team member at Microsoft's venture fund, and she holds a really interesting governance portfolio herself. One of the insights that she's provided me is there's some cultural differences between New Zealand governance and governance internationally, with a specific focus on the US. And I think that comes down to cultural differences between us as people, as New Zealanders and potentially Americans. And also there may be some cadence differences. So it feels like New Zealanders meet more regularly for longer than our US counterparts, even with some very big appointments that Lisa holds for, $100 million, billion-dollar entities. So that's been really interesting to learn from her. And we're actually trying to change some of our processes based on what's been really successful internationally. So I think there's scope for us to learn from international models and not just accept it, but again, question, challenge, and adopt what's going to add value to us in our local context.
That's a great approach. I understand as well that there can be some differences that arise from the legislative framework. And in the US, I believe it's very prescriptive in what they have to achieve, whereas we in the UK and Australia and New Zealand tend to be a little bit more principles based in our legislative framework, so that can create some differences as well.
You're definitely right. And on top of that, I think there's a raft of consumer-facing legislation or regulation that means the way we navigate, say, cybersecurity or customer data rights or some of these emerging climate requirements can be different from geography to geography.
Hey, well, I have got one final question for you, actually.
Sure.
Sorry. That is, what advice would you now give? And you've already given some great pointers in this area in our early parts of the conversation, but what advice would you give to another young director that's stepping into the role?
If they haven't found their first appointment yet, I would say start with something you're really passionate about. For me, that was education. That was the space I already play in. I've worked in education prior to Banqer as well, with a few different ideas of startups. So that's where I wanted to start. I wanted it to be local. And then I just put myself out there, which was the hardest part. But I think that appointment being something a space I was already comfortable in and passionate about was the key to me actually taking that first step. If you've got your appointment lined up, be able to articulate the value you add to the board, because you will add value. Absolutely, you're there for a reason. But you being really clear in yourself around that value will enable you to probe questions, give advice, make suggestions that otherwise you may not have been able to shake out. And from there, for me, I'm just learning governance as a journey. I haven't mastered it. I've got a lot to learn. I seek out mentors in every appointment that I'm fortunate enough to hold. And I just can't wait to see where I end up. But it all started with that one step. And most people don't overcome that threshold. So if you make that first step, you're already beating the 99% and you're successful in your own right.
Thank you very much, Kendall. It's been great to have this conversation with you. I really appreciate your time. I'll look forward to catching up a little bit more next time we're both in the same city. And I'll look forward to seeing you next episode. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Mark.